So tonight we're looking at team building, and at Earthos we look at this on a number of different levels. So we look at team building on a specific project within the organization, we look at team building within the organization itself, and then we look at team building on projects that are working in collaboration and partnership with
like this one, right?
With other organizations, right? And so I want to look at one of our projects as an example. It's called the Roxbury Memory Trail. And I'm going to sort of start with the theoretical team building, and I'm going to then try to explain how this thinking helped us develop the Roxbury Memory Trail initiative. So when we think about team building with community partners, we start by that deep listening that you said earlier. And in that deep listening, what starts to happen is there's this bubbling up of ideas from people in the community. And they often, what's interesting is that if you listen closely and long enough, even if people are saying things that are slightly different, there's always something that's shared. There's always, under all of these little bubbling up, there is kind of a shared space or a shared vision that creates this magnet. It kind of, if you can hear it and you can see it, and then you can start to share it back to the community, it kind of starts to glow. And it's not coming from you, it's coming from that deep listening. And you find that shared compass, that shared vision. And that shared vision, like we said, it starts glowing and it starts to attract people. And
like electrons and neutrons.
Exactly. And each of these people, we have found, brings something unique to helping bring this vision into reality. Usually they come from different organizations, maybe different sectors and different disciplines. Many of them are from and of the community, but also many of these kinds of, sort of visions, like the Roxbury Memory Trail, they require people who are maybe outside of the community as well. And so what happens is, in attracting these people, they're the people who stick to the project. They are invested in stewarding the project. And so you can create a coalition, you can create a steering committee, you've got to create some kind of container that helps make this, helps turn it into a formal process, right? But that vision is coming from the community. It's that deep listening. It holds its own on its own. It's not about you, like you said. And then like we said, it sort of attracts. And usually what we've also found is people from different arenas are bringing different things to help make this happen. And you'll notice that this is a loose container, and yet it still kind of creates a container space. So, there's space here in which other people in the community and outside of the community who are interested in being allies can come in and participate as they're called, as they want to, and that these stewards really help to create that and those opportunities. And so I'm going to explain how this worked with the Roxbury Memory Trail. When we were working with Roxbury, initially it was at the request of the Grove Hall Main Streets and the Boston Department of Neighborhood Development. They asked Earthos if we could work with the community to come up with a sustainability vision plan. And so we started with that deep listening, and we talked to as many people as we could. Phil, one of our Earthos leaders, has a long history working with Roxbury, so he knew many of the elders in the community, and so we just spent hours listening. And what kept coming to the surface was this need for ways of memorializing the history of Roxbury in visible, tangible ways. And then this gentleman named Robert Hector was like, I've been trying to create a memory trail since the 90s. He's like, there's so much interest in it from the community, but we just really haven't been able to get it off the ground. And so we started saying, well, let's see if others are interested. And so we started asking, and then all the bubbles of interest came up. And then we can actually name who showed up. So we had Neighborhood Development Corporation, we had Main Streets, we had the National Center, the National Museum for African American Artists, located in Roxbury.
Wow.
I
I think I know that. I mean, like organization.
Yeah, and Barry Gaither, who's the head of it, who's really an amazing person. Then we had Northeastern AMARP, so it's Northeastern Center for Afro-American Artists. And then who else? Dudley Square Main Streets, and Earthos as a regional collaborator. And our role was really to help
Make container.
Help not actually create the container, but to help establish the processes that held this together. It was really capacity building because all the pieces were there. All of these people were already there. They were already interested in this kind of a project. They just sort of needed a little bit of extra to help it come to be.
Like designing process.
Some designing processes, although the museum and the Artist Center certainly had that capacity, but they didn't have a lot of extra time. So they kind of needed an additional partner who could help them realize their own vision, right? Then we had the Freedom House. We had the library. So we had different people who, actually the library was more like this, who they came in and helped out at strategic moments. And we have schools who also are interested in engaging in the Roxbury Memory Trail for the history for their students. So how can they come in? And then actually what happens is that as they come in and participate, then they bring it out and they start creating stuff that relates, right? And so we start to see that this starts to build, right? And it might turn into other things, but that organic, right, process. But it's all coming from that bubbling up because there's a real need that's there that we haven't, as you said, put on the community. The community said, we want this, we want to be a part of this, and we want to be able to build stuff from this. And so then they start creating their own
things.
And then there's this wonderful synergy that happens, and then it just takes off and it becomes its own.
So they can those additional projects they can learn from your whole experience and what you
from the process potentially.
Yeah.
But the way that this works is that we're always all learning from each other. So we're just one at the table. We bring Earthos, this is one of the things that we bring to the table, but all of those organizations know something about team building. They all know about how to create projects. I mean, they're all doing this. We just happen to bring a specific, you help remind us, Stephen, it's like the stone soup, right? We each bring this, there's that big pot with the stone in the middle that attracts everybody's ingredients, and we're each giving different ingredients, and it's the diversity of the ingredients that makes the soup so wonderful. And it's not like our ingredient is any better than anybody else's.
Yeah, when you make a stone soup, every small ingredient, every little contribution makes a huge difference. So I like to think of the analogy with spices. Even if the only thing you can bring is a little bit of paprika or salt, as opposed to me bringing a chicken or vegetables, all of those things are necessary. So every contribution matters, and the diversity, like you said, makes the soup more it's healthier, it's more rich, more flavorful. So it's a perfect analogy, right, for team building where you need that diversity.
It's healthier.
It's healthier. You need to, and just valuing all contributions, not thinking that the giant architectural firm with all the money, aka the chicken or whatever, is going to be more valuable than the salt, because without salt, it's not going to taste good. Exactly. So it's a really good metaphor. Yeah.
So and that metaphor just has helped us, but I think each of us at Earthos sort of conceptualizes this a little bit differently. There are some things though that we have learned very clearly. one, you definitely need a clear vision that is coming from the community, and that you're hearing it from multiple arenas, so that there's an element of consensus in the community around its need, rather than it becoming something that is competing for what people are doing in the community. It's actually helping them do their work as well, right? So they think that this vision is something that they can be a part of, but it's also something that they can use to help them do their work.
For me, it's interesting that gentleman that you mentioned, he had a vision from the 90s, or?
But yes, and he had the vision from the 90s from being embedded in the community and hearing the need. I mean, there's a very deep need to see the history memorialized visually.
It's about identity.
It's about identity. You nailed it. And so he was just articulating it. He was just articulating what the community was saying it needed. And then we kind of plugged in again in 2012. And so it was this thing that was alive despite us, despite him. You know, it wasn't about him or about us, but it was this thing that was alive in the community that's continuing to vibrate.
Yeah. And it's also not only just about that, like the need for this is actually really significant in terms of the history of the community of Roxbury. It's a historically African American community in Boston, and obviously there's always tons of racial tensions and issues in the area around that. And in terms of neighborhood development and gentrification, like having a project like this be realized is actually going to create that resilience for a community to sort of withstand that gentrification and say, no, like this is our history, like there is a marker here on the ground that like this happened, like Malcolm X was here and like all this stuff happened here. So it kind of to withstand that onslaught of the gentrification that's coming into Boston.
Acknowledging, how to say?
Yeah, acknowledging, right. And just permanently saying like this is the history of this place, and not making sure that it's not going to get wiped away when a new condo is built, or when Northeastern comes and builds
and a lot of it, actually a lot of the people, I'm sorry to interrupt.
No, that's all I was going to say.
A lot of the people who were around this stewardship table, so that's another thing we need, is a stewardship table, or stewardship team, steward team, and a steward table, is that they wanted that memorial, the memorials for their children, because they had grown up during Malcolm X and Martin Luther King time, and that was like in their memory and in their bones, and their kids' didn't have that memory, and so what they wanted was for their kids and their kids' kids to be able to access that pride in their history and in that place, and to really use that cultural history and that cultural pride, not only as a marker in the face of gentrification, but also to use it to build economy that's based on the people who are there.
Keep the money within the community.
Yeah.
Right.
Well, and also to literally attract people to the community based on the assets of the community as it is. So, and that was a really crucial piece. So these were the things that these stewards were saying. So it wasn't coming from us. So you need a steward team that's, at least 70% of the community, with allies, community plus allies, like Earthos. And then you need a steward table, and this is, like you said, it's the structure and it's the process. So we, as processes, let's just say that, because there were a lot of different processes that we had to put in place. Once we decided, yes, this is something we're all committed to, and this core stewardship team wanted to do this. There, it was about this many of us, and our respective organizations. Then we said, okay, now we have to create the table, and then you have to have this, so that this includes doing minutes, and how do you create and record and share the materials. How are you going to fund it? So like we started going after grants together. Who would be the organization that was going to host the grant? So processes like that are just, I mean, practical, right? But also, how are we going to interact with each other?
And who did the coordination? Like who did the...
So who coordinates? Exactly, that's a question.
Are you like Earthos or someone else?
So there were a couple of us that took the lead with the coordination and the administration. Hi, Quasi.
Yeah.
Hi.
Sorry today.
It's great to see you, and maybe I can go back over this. There were a couple of us that had to identify. So I think you have to have a clear admin person or people that are working together to make sure. And that was actually one of the challenges of this project, is we did hit a moment when we didn't have funding, and it still required administration, and it kind of the project kind of sputtered for a little bit because we didn't have a clear administrative person. But we were all still so committed to this vision that we didn't drop the project. We kept looking for someone who could do the administration, and now we have someone again. So the project keeps going, it keeps living, because of the fact that you have those stewards who are committed regardless of whether or not there's funding.
So I have a question, like who is making the last decision? Like,
so we make decisions together, and we use consensus. No
committee or
it's like we all agree
voting
or we don't. No, it's all agree or we don't. And I think, but see, this is the thing, is I think every team has to decide. So some teams you have to decide your structure, you have to decide your processes, and you have to decide your administration. So for us, our structure was a monthly meeting. No matter what, we got together monthly. If we had to do interim meeting calls, we did. And then a couple of us were focusing on grant writing. I mean, just like any organization. But you have to decide how you want to do that. That works for the team that's showing up. And again, this is all by choice. And initially, this is all unpaid. So everyone at the table has to buy in, and you work it out until you get there. But the thing is if this is strong enough, it's like those are the people they're going to show up, and it's going to work. We see this over and over and over again. It's just like you're making your project happen with or without money. You're making your project happen with it and without money.
Because people are showing up. They want to be part of that because they see purpose.
Exactly.
And
that's right. Clear vision and purpose. And it has to be bigger than any organization.
And any person individually.
Yeah.
Right. And that's really demonstrating bioregional leadership. It's like, these are the people who are doing this work anyway, like without getting paid. That's what it means to be a leader in your bioregion, is to really be advocating for that resiliency and community development, just like anyway, regardless of what's happening. Yeah.
And people need to see what that could bring to the whole community. And it somehow connects and the whole people, like that thing it's making the community. Right?
Well, that's why I was saying. So you have the vision that's bubbled up, and then you have people who are in the community who are probably leaders or have some capacity, right? They might be people who are either leaders of organizations. They might be elders who've retired and who have extra time and a lot of knowledge. They might be young college students who have a lot of ideas and time and passion, right? So those often make good stewards around this table, and they're there no matter what. It doesn't matter. They're committed, and then, like I said, they're creating this structure and this process that allows other people from the community who don't have time and don't have resources to do this, but want to be a part of it and then want to bring it out into their work. So, like you said, it's not about this. It's about, it ends up it ends up feeding the entire community in different ways.
And then in turn, it can attract resources.
Exactly.
Right.
Exactly.
And people with a lot of power in the municipal government or state government, or depending on the project.
Because people usually what brings like if you are really wealthy, then comes what's next, and it's about legacy and like a name or leaving something behind.
Well, I think for each funder, and although that's going to be a conversation for another time, has a different priorities. So depending on the funder, you're going to deal with different priorities. But certainly with the Roxbury Memory Trail, one of our funding groups are people who want to leave legacies. And so we would obviously, that's sort of part of the structure, processes, and administration. I mean, just like any organization, you have to create those. It's just a little different when it's an ad hoc group of people, right? They're around the table not because they're under an organizational structure. They're around the table because they want to see something happen.
Can you say one more time how you became engaged in that? Who brought you there? Like...
Well, so there were a couple. It's interesting. We had been working with the community in some different ways. Phil has like a 30-year history of working in this community as a designer in different ways. We were asked through Grove Hall Main Streets, which is a nonprofit organization in the community, that they have a design committee with Boston's neighborhood development department. The two of them together asked us to do a sustainability vision plan. Not paid. It was done through the Boston Architectural College. So we had students as kind of student interns. At the BAC, they want students to have some practice experience. So we worked with students and worked with the community to do this visioning, the sustainability visioning process. And we started with that deep listening. That's what Earthos model is. And so that deep listening, but it had already started because of Phil's work with the community and over the many years. And that was the bubbling up of listening.
Can you write that down? Sustainable vision, or how did you say?
Oh, so it was a sustainability vision plan. So right, you actually there needs to be some kind of a catalyst, I think is what you're saying. And this project here too, the art farm, similar thing. There was a catalyst, and then we did deep listening in the community and stuff that was bubbling up. But I think, like you said, something has to initiate it. In this case, it was a sustainability visioning plan.
Yeah.
But this ended up, as you can tell, we did this, but what it led us to was that there really needs to be a memory trail. That at the heart of this community, sustainability isn't about green roofs. At the heart of sustainability is sustainability of the culture of the place. And there
was actually people who are outspoken about that, saying we don't want another community garden in a vacant lot. We don't want all of our vacant lots to be turned into gardens necessarily. While that has its benefits but it's good to do that, we actually, like you said, want to create asset and value in our community. And we need to do other things besides gardens in order to make that happen, to bring money and resources back into our community and to keep it there.
Exactly.
They're viewing those community gardens as sort of like a lubricant of gentrification in some ways. So.
And that was when, we see it all the time, ideas come from outside. And certainly when we were doing the sustainability vision plan, working with students, and those ideas came up. And then it was like, there was, some, and maybe, but also really we need this. This is really what we need for sustainability.
And in what stage is that project?
So right now, we are working with the Arts Commission in Boston on the first two markers. There is money allocated in the city of Boston for those two markers. We're in the middle of the permitting process, which is kind of complicated. But by July, we're going to have a phone app of the trail. And so we did a living master plan. So that was sort of the idea, was instead of doing a fixed master plan that would say this is what it's going to be, we do a living planning process. So every year it can get updated, and if different ideas are bubbling in relationship to creating that trail. I think the first couple of years, a lot of it was working on this, and then also sort of having community conversations, larger community conversations around what are those most significant sites. So if you think about a trail where you're memorializing sites, you don't want that decided by a few people, right? Even if they are of the community. So you need an ongoing sort of dynamic conversation that's comes in many different forms, and so we did a lot of different events, and we even did an art show where we found funding to hire a local artist to take pictures of the site, and then that was at the National Museum of Afro-American Artists, and also at the Freedom House, which is a core community gathering place, to spark the conversation. And so what happened is that then it really it went from sort of this into people were bringing the ideas off into where they were, like into the schools. And so even though it's not built, it's in the imagination of the community. And we've just seen like a lot of projects in the schools that focus on these historical sites. And this is really what we had talked about, and I'm going where I didn't intend, but when we look at outcomes with these projects, we have to go in without fixed outcomes. This is what you were saying earlier, Stephen, because and especially as designers, we think of an outcome as something that's built, right? We go in, it's a Roxbury Memory Trail, it's a built trail.
We have idea, we structure that idea, and we are going for that.
Right.
And that's what's
it's
happening.
not about that.
You have fixed benchmarks that you like, okay, benchmark 1, check, benchmark 2, check, and
It's
you're just
more like organic.
moving along, right, yeah.
And it's you do need to have goals and what you're working towards, but if those are flexible goals,
Did you
then
have
you can what you can do if with flexible goals towards like a vision that's large enough so it doesn't have to be a specific thing or a specific outcome, then you can engage the resources of the community to create something that's in this vision that may not be the thing that you initially started with, but it does what you
And that's almost like the artistic process. I mean, artists always say all the time that the art kind of makes itself. Like, you don't go into a painting thinking, I'm going to paint this. Like, it actually ends up telling you what to paint. And it's like a back and forth, it's a dialogue.
It's process.
Right, and you're not just coming in with a prescriptive notion.
But did you have a timeline? Like, you needed to do that